Severe thunderstorms that plagued the Midwest this morning could re-intensify this afternoon in the Great Lakes. We'll tell you what to expect in just a moment, but first, an update on Danny. The tropical storm is moving through the Atlantic after buffeting parts of New England this morning. However, the region is still being affected in some ways. We'll get the details from Janetta Jones in the Forecast Center.
All right, thanks, Declan. We are watching Tropical Storm Danny as it buffets the coastline, now bringing strong gusty winds as well as some heavy rain to portions of Cape Cod. We're going to show you the latest information on Danny right off the bat here. Tropical storm status, winds are at 60 miles per hour. This is as of the 11 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time advisory. It's moving towards the northeast at 15 miles per hour. Notice that it has slowed down a bit, and a gradual turn towards the east-northeast is expected over the next 24 hours, according to the National Hurricane Center. It is about 70 miles south of Nantucket Island, Massachusetts, and the coordinates, in case you're plotting along with us, 40.3 north, 70.2 west. Estimated pressure, 994 millibars. So we are still dealing with a tropical storm. We've had wind gusts up to 45 and even higher than that, 45 miles per hour around Nantucket, as parts of Cape Cod and Nantucket Island are getting ripped right now. Here's some scenes from earlier this morning on the fringe effects of Tropical Storm Danny as it brushed Chatham, Massachusetts. The area is on the far eastern end of the Cape. Rain and wind kept beachgoers indoors a good deal of the morning. Winds gusted at times to 35 miles per hour. However, stronger winds were felt farther south in places like Nantucket, as I just mentioned. We do want to let everyone know that we still have tropical storm warnings in effect. We'll show you those shortly. We have a crew standing by in Chatham, Massachusetts. Mike Seidel, it looks a little windy there.
Yes, Janetta, a little bit windy. We're getting one of our higher gusts right now, probably pushing 40 miles an hour, and we are still getting some of that rain coming in off the Atlantic. We're here in Chatham, which is about as far east as you can go on the Cape. Now, you mentioned the higher winds in Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard. That's not surprising, since there are islands south of here out over the open waters of the Atlantic off in that direction. Looking down the beach, a beach that would normally be filled with locals and tourists in July in the summertime with the heat and humidity, but not today. Temperature now just struggling to get above 60 degrees. However, if you've got weekend plans out here on the Cape, we do not anticipate any problems. This should be out of the way, and the sun should be back out by tomorrow, and it will be warming up this weekend. Notice the boats out here in the water, that they're really not bobbing too much up and down. We do have a break here from the Atlantic, from the fury of the Atlantic, but again, I was here for Edouard back on Labor Day last September, and this is nothing like Edouard. In fact, most of the locals stopping by here on the Chatham Pier are just calling this a nor'easter, and basically that's what it is, with wind and rain and winds are really not pushing more than 35 or 40 miles an hour. However, we are under a tropical storm warning, and once again, we do not anticipate any problems, any serious problems from the wind or any kind of problems out here on the coast as far as flooding. Tide, by the way, is still going out.
Okay, thanks so much, Mike. We'll check back with you in about half an hour. Do want to show everyone what is going on with those tropical storm warnings for you right now, and here's the way they are looking. Tropical storm warnings in effect for portions of southern New England, including Woods Hole, Massachusetts to Plymouth, Massachusetts, as well as Cape Cod, Nantucket Island, and Martha's Vineyard. These are tropical storm warnings in effect. All right, here is a look at our satellite vantage point, and you can see that this is Tropical Storm Danny. Now, obviously, we do have a little bit of dry air intrusion, as they call it, here on the western flank, and so we are watching to see if we're going to see any weakening for Tropical Storm Danny, but at this point, winds still at 60 miles per hour. We're still getting quite a bit of rain and quite a bit of wind, as Mike was just showing you. Want to take a look at the radar, and you can see that New York City, Philly, Dover looking a little bit better, but Boston itself is still getting the rain. I should say Cape Cod still getting the rain. As you can see from this particular radar, the showers are intense from Chatham all the way through Nantucket Island. This is Nantucket Island, just in case those of you don't know where it is. You can barely see it written there, but it does say Nantucket. So that's what is happening with Tropical Storm Danny. Will it continue to affect southern New England's coastline? Will it move on out to sea a little bit later on? These are questions we are going to try and answer for you. Now, for a look at the rest of the country, here's Declan.
Thanks a lot, Janetta. Elsewhere in the nation, stifling heat is going to make the outdoors a bit unbearable today, especially in the southern plains. We're talking temperatures in excess of 100 degrees in some areas. Today will be another hot one in Nashville, Tennessee. Temperatures yesterday hit 90, but will soar into the mid-90s today. Any outlook?
Weather Channel. No place on Earth has better weather.
Well, good afternoon to you. Time for a look at the tropics. Of course, the story is Tropical Storm Danny. Just a brief review, first starting with the current conditions as of 2 p.m. Danny centered 35 miles south of Nantucket. Is not far away at all. Tops sustained winds at 60, moving north-northeast at 12, so gradually the speed has been decreasing this morning into early this afternoon. There's the latest pressure, 994 millibars. From the track, it started out, of course, in the Gulf of Mexico, and then it made a turn into Alabama and then northeastward into North Carolina. Really left a legacy of very heavy rain, flooding rain, anywhere from 5 to close to 14 or 15 inches. Of course, excluding that 40-inch total around Mobile Bay. And the reason I say 40 inches, because that's what the Doppler radar estimated. I know a lot of the gauges officially had 25 to 30, but in a hurricane, that rain is moving horizontally as opposed to vertically. And a lot of the rain doesn't get caught in the gauge. So just for argument's sake, that's where the bullseye was. Looking farther to the north, here's our satellite picture. And as we look at southern New England, that is the center of Danny. A better satellite picture, a zoomed-in shot here showing what's going on. Again, what we're looking at, here's the elbow out on Cape Cod, and Mike Seidel at Chatham. So Mike's standing right about here, and you can see why he's seeing some squally weather. Meanwhile, down to Martha's Vineyard, over toward Nantucket, the center of Danny, getting real close, again 35 miles away. And where is the center? If we look very closely here, I think you can see the spiral type of bands here, and that gives us a clue where that center circulation is. It's right about in through this area, right about there. So it is going to pass either over Nantucket or just barely off to the east. So Mike is going to be in the weather for a while before this tropical storm tries to pull away and gradually lose its tropical characteristics, and it's called extratropical. Let's check out the warnings. Here we go with Plymouth all the way down to Woods Hole, unchanged here. Tropical warnings, storm warnings still in effect. Latest radar should be back over to Providence, but gradually drying out across Long Island, still out to Montauk. Still a few showers daring to visit. As we check out the Gulf of Mexico, looking great today. We do have this one flare-up of showers and storms, central Bahamas. Nothing organized here. Over toward Jamaica, looking great. Virgin Islands fine, only very isolated showers all the way out to Barbados. Farther to the east, still looking great. Nothing organized in the way tropical weather goes. And July is ending very slowly here. The rest of the tropics really has been busy, though, with all these tropical systems. Looking over toward the coast of Africa, we have a deadly combination of heat and humidity in the plains. We'll have more of that in a moment. Plus also tornado warning out of the Jacksonville area. Fernandina Airport, possibly a tornado. I'll talk about that in a second. But first, an update on Danny. We get the latest now from Janetta Jones in the Forecast Center.
All right, thanks a lot, Rich. We are watching for heavy rainfall along the coastline there of Cape Cod. We're also watching for some strong gusty winds, perhaps over 45 miles per hour. We have the latest information for you now as of the 2 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time advisory from the National Hurricane Center. 35 miles south of Nantucket Island, Massachusetts. Winds at 60 miles per hour, moving north-northeast at 12 miles per hour. And the estimated pressure, 994 millibars. It is significantly slower than it was at one point earlier today, and we've had a more northerly jog. These are some scenes from this morning from Tropical Storm Danny as it brushed Chatham, Massachusetts. The area is on the far eastern end of the Cape, and rain and wind obviously kept the beachgoers from going outside. Winds gusted at times to 35 miles per hour. However, we have had reports of winds over 45 miles per hour in places like Nantucket. We're joined now by our hurricane specialist, John Hope. John, what's the latest now on Tropical Storm Danny?
Well, the center of the storm is going to go very close to Nantucket. It's not right over there. We have a data buoy down there about 60 miles southeast of Nantucket, and we know the center went just to the west of that, so it's not going to go much east of Nantucket. It might go right over Nantucket. But having said that, we want to point out that the winds aren't necessarily any stronger around the center than they are up there at Nantucket right now. As a matter of fact, the winds may pick up a little bit, but we don't think very much. We think possibly on Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard and portions of Cape Cod, we could see gusts to 60 perhaps, but no stronger than that.
And once again, we have noticed a different change there with Danny? It doesn't seem as tropical as did, let's say, yesterday at this
Well, no, it's not really very tropical at all. If we were just starting in now, we might not even call it a tropical system. It may have some tropical characteristics, but it looks more like a North Atlantic storm, which is not tropical.
Okay, speaking of that, we have a crew standing by in Chatham, Massachusetts. Mike Seidel has been enduring the elements, shall we say. Mike, have conditions changed any?
Not really. We're continuing to see the squalls come and go, Janetta and John, and we just checked with the harbor master just up here in the parking lot. He's got an anemometer and wind vane, and the peak gust here so far has been 48 miles an hour, and I have my little wind wizard, which is rather unofficial, and you can see on there the meter, and we've been clocking gusts between 45 and 50 miles an hour over the past 20 minutes. Winds are sustained at about 25 miles an hour. The rain again has slackened off, but if we can get Randy maybe to swing around here now that the rain has slackened off a little bit and take a look at some of these boats out here in the bay. Remember, we're sheltered from the Atlantic Ocean, guys, and you can see the boats are bobbing up and down, but nothing like we've seen with hurricanes in the past. And the boats are okay. We've had a lot of locals, obviously the owners of these vessels, these crafts, to come out and check out their boats this morning. The wind continues to howl, though, and the tide continues to rise. We'll swing back over to the beach. High tide is about another 3.5 hours away, and as you look here on the coast, you can see the seaweed from the high tide from earlier today. So we're rapidly approaching high water from earlier today, and we've still got about 3.5 hours to go. So obviously the tide will be higher, but we're a long way from getting the water up towards the dune line and then up towards the buildings. I think we're going to be okay as far as any flooding potential goes. But again, it's these squalls that really come in and rake us here at Chatham. By the way, if you're not familiar with Cape Cod, Chatham is on the far eastern end of the Cape, about as far east as you can go unless you're on the eastern part of Nantucket out in the Atlantic.
So, Mike, you're having a bit of a lull in the rain now, you say. But what about the wind? The wind seems as windy as ever. Just because the rain lets up, it doesn't mean that the wind does it?
No, it doesn't. In fact, that gust you just probably saw me take was probably pushing 50 miles an hour. And that is something we've really noticed over the past half an hour or so. The wind has picked up and has been more consistent instead of being consistently not as gusty. Earlier today, 30, 35 miles an hour, but as I mentioned, officially a peak at 48. And once we finish here, we'll go up and check up at the harbor master's office and see what that peak wind just was. We're going to hang out here as long as necessary. Again, a tropical storm warning continues. But as far as debris or anything, we just took a little drive around the Cape, around Chatham, out towards the north and northeast, and we saw very little, if anything. We saw a couple of twigs down. So unlike Edouard, when the streets were littered with debris, we have not seen any
superficial damage with these kind of winds. That's about it.
Okay. We do have tropical storm warnings still in effect, as Mike was alluding to.
And that only means that 39 miles an hour or higher, not anywhere near hurricane force.
Okay, so the major threat with this is obviously going to be with the heavy rainfall. And we could get, what, 2 to 4 inches, John?
2 to 4, and if it lingers a little more than we thought earlier, which I think it's going to, we could see more than that in some places.
And this satellite view pretty much tells the story. We see that trough to the west of Tropical Storm Danny, and that's what you think may be steering it a little bit.
It's steering it now to the north, but looking at the indications that are coming in this afternoon, we still believe that this is going to curve off to the northeast. It's just been delayed a little bit. We might not see that process begin for another several hours.
So the sunshine that we were forecasting for perhaps later today, probably not going to happen.
Not today.
Okay. Once again, we appreciate you stopping by and giving us your expertise on Tropical Storm Danny. We are going to go back to the studio now.
The Weather Channel. No place on Earth has better weather.
Good Friday evening, everyone. It's time now for our tropical weather update. I'm Lisa Moser. Thank you for joining us here at the Weather Channel. You know, it was this time last week we were talking about Hurricane Danny. At that time, of course, it was down in the Gulf of Mexico, made landfall on Saturday in the Mobile Bay area, and boy, Alabama really had a lot of problems with Hurricane Danny. It eventually tracked across northern Georgia, dumping a lot of rain in Charlotte, North Carolina, moved across the boundary between North Carolina and Virginia into the Atlantic, and this morning we found it causing the Nantucket area to have a lot of rain, a lot of cloud cover, winds around 40 miles per hour. We are currently looking at what is Tropical Storm Danny, the second time it has been a tropical storm. Now just south of Nantucket, about 25 miles southeast of the Nantucket vicinity, and we are looking at the Cape Cod, very wet because of what is still a tropical storm Danny. Very interesting this week. Looking at all of the Cape Cod vicinity under tropical storm warnings. It's been a very gray, gloomy day for folks in Hyannis, New Bedford, Truro, Massachusetts. We're looking at that Cape Cod area to have about maybe 4 inches of rainfall before this evening is out, possibly even more. Danny's been a very slow mover to the north, and this is an area that has just been inundated by the rain bands, and that is the biggest threat. The winds haven't been too bad for a tropical storm. The eye, of course, still out, not as well defined, but what we're looking at right out here where the eye is, and notice that we have a few bands of drier air that are actually making its way into the center of Danny. So it's not a true signature for a tropical storm, but still very impressive, although the winds closer to the eye are not the strongest winds. It is the outer perimeter where we're seeing those winds that are a little bit stronger, around 60 miles per hour, gusting at times. The cloud cover is extending all the way into the mid and central areas of Massachusetts. Looking at the Doppler radar, you can see several bands making their way inland, and actually a piece of the Cape Cod vicinity getting a little bit of a break from the rainfall at this time, but the winds are still there, around 30 miles per hour. New Bedford reporting winds this hour around 25 miles per hour. Hyannis around 20. That's a little further inland when we talk about New Bedford. We are looking at lighter rain make it further inland. And also notice that a couple of bands have come across the extreme northeast area of Long Island, and so some impressive rainfall amounts are likely to come in from the Long Island vicinity this evening. It should get a little bit better by tomorrow morning, though. It is beginning to get on a northeasterly track. We expect it to pull away, but it's been a very slow mover the past several hours. That's likely to continue. Not a lot going on in the Gulf. The Gulf kind of calm this evening. In the Caribbean, we are looking at some impressive convection here across the Bahamas and over much of western Cuba. Also down towards Belize, we're seeing some impressive convection there. And we're looking at some clearer skies over Venezuela. Earlier we saw some convection. It was kind of scattered, but looks like things will be clearing out overnight tonight. Not a lot else out there in the intertropical convergence zone. That's kind of settled down a little bit just to the east of South America. Looking at the intertropical